Hello, everyone. This is Brian Kelly from Association Mavens, where you get direct access to some of the foremost thinkers and teachers in the association industry. My guest today is Jeff Cagna. Jeff is the founder of Principled Innovation, as well as an author, speaker, and advisor to associations across North America and around the world. After serving as an association executive for more than a decade, Jeff founded his company to help associations thrive in uncertain times. Thanks for joining me today, Jeff.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to talk with you this afternoon about your 5 reasons why membership is killing the association business model. I think that it's a really interesting topic. And in fact, last week I had an interview with Mary Byers, who is the co-author of Race for Relevance. And one of the concepts we talked about was this idea of associations starting to think a little bit more like a business and what the ramifications are of that. So, to kind of kick off our conversation, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, where did this idea come from that associations need to think like a business, or that they should start, restructuring things around a business model that makes, is really kind of very different from how they've been operating in the past?
Well, I think that we've been saying to associations, we meaning those of us who are advising associations, have been saying to association leaders for a long time that they need to think like a business. So I don't think that part is new. I think what is new is, at least new to us, is the recognition that our organizations operate on business models. I mean, I think that's always been true, but we only in the last few years have really started thinking about our business models in a very disciplined and kind of focused and holistic way. We've been talking about business models in associations going all the way back to the dot-com boom, when companies that emerged in the late 90s and early 2000s before the bust were saying, we've got the ways of doing business that are going to destroy associations. And of course that didn't happen because they didn't have sustainable business models. But what we learned from that process was that associations clearly were operating on a business model, and it was a business model that faced a lot of challenges at the time, and those challenges I think have simply become so great in 2012, so intense, that it really has become critical for us to be having this conversation. So I think in the last few years, one of the things I've tried to do is really bring this conversation into associations. We've been talking about strategy for a long time, so-called strategic planning, which I think is not a good use of our time because for a variety of reasons, but in the context of business model thinking, I think it's because we don't talk about the business model and we talk about strategy most of the time. We just simply say, well, these are the things we want to do, and we set a bunch of goals, but we never ask the question, do we have the capacity to do this? Do we have the right business model in place to do this in a way that allows us to enable our purposeful action while also generating some responsible level of profitability? So I think that this conversation has been going on for the last few years, that I've been trying to drive around business models, and I think it's going to continue, as evidenced by the number of people who came to the session that you attended in Chicago. We had quite a full house, and I think a lot of people are struggling with these questions around how their business model is going to be sustainable going forward. And I think that's definitely something that a lot of associations are worried about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with kind of these ideas that you've been putting forth and really kind of challenging this notion of orthodox thinking, have you seen a good response from association executives along this line of thinking, or have you kind of been butting heads with folks in regards to this area?
Well, I think there's always going to be people who are naysayers or who prefer the status quo to thinking differently about the future. Unfortunately, that's still true. There's still resistance in our organizations. But I would say that for me, the real issue, it's not so much that there are naysayers, because that's always been true, as I said. For me, the real issue, what will really separate the leaders from people who are not really leaders, is not merely the responsiveness to challenging the orthodoxies of the association community, but those who are actually willing to do something about it. It's fine to say we're going to have a provocative conversation and we're going to upend our assumptions. I'm all in favor of that, and I advocate that, and I do that with my clients. But it's the leaders on both the staff and voluntary sides the ones who are going to do something, who are going to say, and we're not going to keep doing it this way. We are going to innovate our business model. We are going to take that seriously and not do it in half measures. Because I think what happens a lot of the time is that they undertake to do this, they realize it's hard, and then they stop doing it fully. They only do part of it. And I'm not trying to blame people. I'm not trying to be critical. I'm just simply saying that it becomes so difficult to do what is required to make the fundamental shifts that are necessary, that we push it to the back burner because other things that are easier to do are more psychologically satisfying. No matter how, for example, no matter how complicated it is to plan an annual meeting, and it is very complicated because I used to do that in my association career. There's a lot of, there's a million and one details that go along with that.
Yeah.
That is an infinitely easier thing for an organization to do than it is to make a fundamental shift in its business model. Not just because the annual meeting is something that is short term and something that we kind of have the dynamics around, because we've built capacity to do that. And so what's challenging with the business model discussion and with challenging assumptions around orthodoxy is that we haven't done that. So we have not built the capacity in our organizations to do that well. So that's one of the things we have to do, is move beyond merely the discussion phase of all of this and actually get into the implementation phase. And I find that that's making that transition into undoing decades worth of doing things a certain way is an extremely difficult thing to do. And we need leaders who are determined to do that, and not existing in some form of denial that says, well, we can just get by until things improve and we have a little more time, because that's never going to happen. We're never going to have big blocks of time anymore to undertake a total transformation of our organization.
Right.
We have to do it in real time as we're doing other things.
Absolutely. So, the next question I wanted to explore with you a little bit is this, kind of concept of what will it take for associations to continue to thrive over the next 10 years. We've talked about this business model thinking as being kind of a key element of that, but what are some specifics, of things that associations should be seriously considering doing to keep thriving, continuing forward over the next decade?
Well, I think, it's hard to, there's no playbook for that. So I can't say to you, these are the 6 things that associations need to do to be thriving over the next decade. Every association is going to need to discover what combination of things it needs to do to be able to thrive. And that's going to depend on what's going on in the industry or profession now and in the long term, and how do forces beyond that profession or industry affect it. What's the impact that the economy has on the industry or profession? What's the impact of social demographic shift? What's the impact of political and scientific and technological and cultural shift on that industry or profession? So you have to understand your context, and then you have to understand what your stakeholders of the future within that profession or industry are going to be looking for, what their long-term outcomes might look like over that. So there's no recipe book that says Association X has to do this or Association Y does that. You have to have that understanding, and then you have to then build a business model, around that to make it sustainable. And I think the other thing we have to be able to do in that is say, what are the things we're going to stop doing? I've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years with organizations that are doing a lot of things that sound really, really good, and I'm listening to them talk about the things they're doing, and we're doing this and we're doing that. And, it sounds like the staff's got it well in hand and they've got board support. And one of the hardest things that we'll have to do in that case is ask the question, even though we're doing these things and we're doing them well, and they sound like the right things, they feel like the right things, are they actually the right things? Are we actually doing things that give us the possibility of thriving, or are we just doing things that we know we're good at doing, or that we know how to do?
Yep.
And I think that's going to be the hardest aspect of it too, probably. And it goes back to what I was saying a moment ago. Are we prepared to learn to do things that we do not already do, and are we prepared to learn them well enough to do them extremely well? So, for example, just to give you one specific thing that I think is part of the mix for us, we talk a lot about the idea of curation, the curation of content, and what that means. I don't think we have even scratched the surface of how the curation of content can affect what we do with our stakeholders, right? and what that looks like. Is it a sort of an expert-based curation? Is it, a more of a social curation? Is it done algorithmically, or is it done, by human beings? Is it done, in real time, or is it done over time? And what combination of approaches are we going to use in order to accomplish the fundamental outcome, which is helping stakeholders that we're trying to serve make sense of what's happening around them, make meaning around what's happening around them, and then make better decisions that help them achieve their long-term outcomes. So that's really what curation is about. Curation is not about figuring out how to take what we know already and make it more bite-sized. That may be a piece of it. What curation is really about is how do we help stakeholders who are inundated, deluged with information and knowledge, make sense of what is really most critical to their success, to achieving their longer term outcomes, even if that doesn't belong to us, right? So our role is not to necessarily generate as much as it has been, but it is to help curate those things, and other people are doing that too, so we have competition.
Right.
That's a specific thing that I think is part of the mix for most, if not all, associations. But how different associations will apply curation in concert with other activities that they will perform, I think is something that remains more specific to particular organizations, given their unique set of challenges and their unique strategic context.
Yeah. So something like content curation is a shift from this idea of being a member-centric organization where the greatest benefit that we're offering our members is membership in the organization. Is that kind of what you're saying? Is that content curation as one path forward to getting away from membership as a core aspect of the association's business?
Well, I think the way I would look at that in the context of a business model, and again, we talk in the business model conversation around there being 9 building blocks of the business model. So I think the content curation would be something that would appear in the building block called key activity, right? So it's a key activity the organization would perform among other key activities. I think where the shift's going to be is the shift away from building the centricity of future business models around membership away from that toward building the centricity of membership of business models, around value creation, and not just incremental value creation, but radical new value creation. So really ramping up our capacity, our capabilities as organizations to create radical new value for stakeholders who face new challenges, new realities, and have a different set of outcomes. And I think fundamentally, I think the thing I would say to the people who are watching this and who are listening to this is, if you go back and listen to the answer that I gave to the previous question, what I would say is that what I tried to do there is what I don't hear in the way we're talking about a lot of these things in a lot of our associations, which is how do we bring a 21st century sensibility to the discussion, right? We can't continue to have conversations about new value creation in our organizations that center on the same set of activities, right? There's a lot of discussion now about, how do you improve conferences and how do you improve publications and how you improve those things. And I suppose on some level there's nothing wrong with that, but understand that those are likely to be short-term fixes for us relative to longer-term opportunities that we have to exploit. Right. So it's not to say that we won't do conferences, and it's not to say that we won't do publications, but we are in a process of transitioning away from the old products and services toward better ways of delivering and supporting information flows and access to knowledge and building and making best use of network relationships. So the conversation and its content and tone and language has to be different going forward and has to reflect the realities of the 21st century, rather than simply stating, well, we have to figure out a way to do a better conference. Because if we're how to do a better conference, not only are we going to be in the world of everyone else who's trying to figure out how to do a better conference, and there are many people trying to do that, but we will miss the opportunity to connect with the realities of who our stakeholders in the 21st century are. In a world awash with information, but within which more and more people, billions of people carrying mobile devices and tablets and smartphones and whatnot. This is not about, how do you do a better conference or deliver a better magazine. This is about how do you reach people who are walking around with miniaturized computers and sensors in their pockets
Yep.
and live in a world that, operates on a real-time basis, not on a schedule set by a governing board. So there's a shift in mindset that I think has to happen in this, that even comes before what I said before, which is, are we going to do anything about it? You
Right.
can't about it until you make that shift in mindset.
So, do you think that there's enough time for associations to kind of wrap their head around, essentially this different approach, and start executing on some of these things, and staying on top of addressing these issues? Or do you think if it's not happening now, that it's going to be very, very difficult to continue on?
Hmm. So another way of asking that question is our associations doomed?
I guess, yes.
And I mean, I get asked that question in different forms in different ways a fair bit, and I guess I would say, I suppose in a very selfish response, I would not have committed a career to this if I thought we were doomed. And maybe I'll, maybe in 10 years I'll wish I'd done something else. I don't know. But I don't think that's the case. But I will say this: I think the window is rapidly closing. I don't think we realize how quickly the window will close once we finally get to that point. And I'm not trying to be alarmist by saying that. I do have this reputation for being, something of an alarmist or a grim reaper on some things, and I'm pretty hard on us. But I will say that I think there's opportunities out there, and I say consistently that we can do those things, but we have to be willing to give up doing the things we've always done and expecting a different result, right? Which is Einstein's colloquial definition of insanity,
Yep.
and start thinking much more clearly about how we're going to experiment with doing the different things that we need to do today, and then quickly scaling those things up that work for our stakeholders. And again, I'm not suggesting in any way that this is a simple process, nor is it likely to be a quick process in the sense that we're not going to shut the office down on Friday and announce on Monday that we're working on a new business model. And we're going to continue to be who we are and who we have been for at least the immediate future, but that has to be married to an ongoing and I think very proactive process of experimentation and prototyping and testing and engaging with stakeholders and on in small ways to figure out what works and what resonates, and then rapidly building that up as quickly as we can after that. So I think there's an opportunity out there. There's still a window, but I think the window is rapidly closing, and we have to be much more proactive than we have been up till now. I think across the board, not universally. Some organizations are trying, but it's not a simple process, and it's not necessarily always the fastest process. But we have to try to do what we can to accelerate it, and I think that it is critical that we start that right away.
So, would you say that there's examples of associations out there that are pursuing this path now, and doing some of the testing and the prototyping, and trying to take a step in the right direction along these terms? Have you seen that? Have you heard stories? Is there anything like that you could share?
Well, I think there are certainly associations out there, but I can't, I get asked questions about, the examples, who are the organizations we should be following. And, I don't commit, a lot of those stories to my mind to say who are those people, who are those organizations, mostly because I think a lot of those experiments are so nascent. They're such in such early stage. I'm not sure there's much we can learn from them.
Yeah.
And they're so context dependent that I'm not sure that they're that instructive. And I think also sometimes sometimes that, I'm not saying you're doing this, but I think in a lot of cases that question gets asked because people are looking for some psychological comfort that someone else is out there trying, and so that they don't have to be the pioneer. And I guess my response is usually conditioned by, don't worry about what other organizations are doing. Focus on your own organization,
Yeah.
and focus on doing what you need to do to get yourself to that place. So it's not disingenuous, and nor am I trying to be flippant about it. I just think that we've got to focus less. I think there's this natural inclination in our organizations to say, well, who's got the best practices that we can follow, and I think there are no best practices. There are you know, barely any practices as such. People are kind of inventing this and having to create it on the way. And there are things we know that we can try, like, curation is a thing. There are things that we can experiment with. But rather than worrying about exactly where it is in other organizations, I say let's worry about our own organizations and get focused on doing those things. And then if more organizations start doing things, then we can start sharing lessons learned and and insights from across different organizations. So I know that that's not a particularly satisfying answer, but I think we need to take a different approach than we typically do, and really just worry about what we're doing and get that work underway before we start worrying about what other people are doing.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I mean, from my perspective as a newcomer to the association industry, I'm really just curious as to, if there's anecdotal stories of associations that are at least, regardless of whether it's, in the early stages or not, but at least really kind of saying that, yes, this is something that is very pertinent to us. This is something that we recognize as an opportunity that we need to seize, and that the window is in fact closing. And so that's kind of where I'm just personally coming from, is out of curiosity,
Yeah,
so
sure.
anything like that.
And it's a perfectly reasonable question, and that's why it gets asked a lot. I mean, I can tell you, I can certainly share this story, without getting into too many details, and say that I worked with an association at the end of last year, where we weren't specifically working on business model innovation, although that came up as part of our work. It was more on building an internal capacity for innovation within this organization. And the reason why this organization decided to move in this direction, this is an organization global in scale, based in the U.S., but in the financial services industry, sort of writ large. And what happened with them was they made an evaluation of their environment, not just today, but over the course of the next 5 years, and they determined at the board level that if they did not build an internal capacity for innovation, that they faced existential threats from competitors outside of the United States.
Right.
And so when, as part of the work that I did with them, we did a survey of both their board and their staff to get a sense of where people were coming from, and there was huge agreement on the part of both board and staff that the organization faced serious competition, that in the face of that competition, innovation was absolutely critical to success, and that it would be virtually impossible to see how the organization could succeed in the absence of innovation. Okay, so there's, to me, a good example of an organization recognizing what it needs to do in this environment, and again, setting aside nostalgia and denial and focusing on being determined to say we're not going to allow ourselves to get beat simply by abdicating our responsibility. We're going to do something, even if that means the thing we have to do is something that we're not good at now, right?
Yep.
We're not good at innovation. We don't have an internal capacity for innovation. We might have a culture that is supportive of innovation. We might have a CEO who cares about innovation, but we have not built an internal capacity for innovation. And by that I mean we can't do it in a repeatable way. We don't have that internal skill set, that internal process, that internal approach for innovating that allows us to do it over and over again. We might be able to do a one-off creative event or one-off creative thing here or there, but we can't do it systematically over time, right?
Right.
So that to me is the critical piece. The organization recognized reality. It did not allow nostalgia or denial to get in the way, and the leaders were determined, the staff and voluntary leaders were determined to move the organization forward by committing dollar resources and staff time to a process of building capacity for making innovation happen. To me, that's the kind of situation that we need to see more of in more organizations, and I think it's happening, but again, I don't think it's happening nearly as broadly or as quickly as it needs to.
Gotcha. So one of the other things I wanted to explore with you is along this line, of relevancy and a changing world. some of the obvious things that stand out that would come to mind to not only myself, but I'm sure others, is there's the generational challenge. There's also the technological challenge. Aside from those, I mean, are there any other things that are impacting the shift that needs to happen? And if so, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think all of the forces that have always shaped our society are influencing and reshaping our society as we speak. And it's something that I describe as relentless societal transformation. So I think that what's happening now, and it's been going on for probably the last 20 years, and I think it continues to this day, and I think it gets more intense and it picks up speed and continues in relentlessness, if you will, over the course of the next 10 to 20 years. So it's cultural transformation, and we see it, in the way that our culture as a society has changed, what we care about, what we have come to embrace and accept versus what we believed as a society as recently as 5 or 10 years ago, certainly as recently as 20 years ago. You talk about demographic transformation. It's not just about generational shift, but it's also about racial and ethnic shift in our country, and the fact that we're on pathway to become a majority minority society by the middle of this century, perhaps a little sooner. We're also becoming older as a society. I also think that it's demographic, but it's really social and cultural in the sense that we are not just older, but we're also as a society facing a serious problem with obesity and the effect that that has on our population, on its health, on its productivity and ability to work, and on a variety of other, sort of business and economic factors. It's the fact that our economy is changing. That we've always talked about this shift, that happened a century ago from more agrarian to more industrial economy, and in the course of the last century and change, of these last 110 or so years, we've gone from an industrial economy to a knowledge economy to and really not even so much a knowledge economy as it was an information economy, then a knowledge economy, and now an economy that's based on creativity. And what you're seeing as a consequence of that is you're seeing a lot of shifting in the way business gets done and what business values. And even as we've seen a lot of outsourcing of jobs. We're now seeing more insourcing of jobs out of a sense of patriotism and out of a sense of wanting to bring jobs back home, since our economy has been struggling in creating jobs. But nevertheless, a lot of jobs have still gone offshore
Yeah.
to other parts of the world. And so what, and if you read Dan Pink's work and and sort of value what he does, you'll see that he says that basically, our main advantage as an economy going forward is our creative capacity. And even that is being challenged because there are other countries, notably Singapore and other parts of Southeast Asia, where you see a lot more focus on creativity and innovation inside those countries, and they have national strategies for that. So I think the sort of social and demographic and cultural transformation, the economic transformation, we are on the verge of huge breakthroughs in science. The discovery of the Higgs boson particle, at CERN in the last 10 days, is a notable scientific achievement that won't have any meaningful impact probably on our day-to-day lives, but it ushers in many ways, I think, an era of scientific discovery that is going to be huge in pharmaceuticals and materials and across the board in neuroscience and biology and just extraordinary developments I think are going to occur that will affect us in terms of pharmaceuticals on our on anti-aging drugs and just all kinds of amazing things that are like inventions or things that are likely to come down the pike. And I think above all else, what's happening is technology is pulling along all of those other things, right? So technology is accelerating the pace of cultural shift. Technology is accelerating the pace of political shift, and we haven't even talked about political shift, and that's another one. Be pulling along the pace of political shift and of economic shift. Technology is wreaking havoc on the traditional assumptions of that have underpinned our global economy and have it makes things very different today. So I think all of these forces are now combining and recalibrating at the same time. And again, I think over the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to see all of them accelerate and intensify in ways that, to bring it back to associations, in ways that I think really challenge association leaders, boards, CEOs, C-suite executives, other leaders in our organizations to think in multiple dimensions about how their organizations are likely to shift themselves given different scenarios of the future.
Yeah.
You know, just as an example of kind of taking a couple of trends and pulling them together to kind of give you a sense of how this might how this might affect us in the future. I track a lot of different trend information and a lot of different feeds and whatnot, and look at a lot of different information flows. So if you think about the idea that right now in the U.S. economy, where we have fairly stagnant job growth, and the reasons for that, different political hues will give you different political answers to that. But let's just talk about the fact that it exists. We have, as of the last jobs report, 8.2% unemployment. And one of the things we know is that recent graduates are struggling to find work in this economy, right? So I track, feeds, and I forget what the source is on this, but I remember seeing something in the feeds within the last couple of weeks saying, that younger people are now being encouraged to pursue jobs, I suppose primarily at this point in technology outside of the U.S.,
Right.
right? Now, if that expands and if there's a long-term drag in the number of jobs being created for young people in the U.S., and more and more young people start going outside of the US to find employment, we could start having a big migration
Yeah.
of the under 40, under 35, under 30 population outside of the US to other parts of the world, a huge expatriate generation that could go elsewhere. Right now we're counting on that generation to be working in the US, and for a variety of reasons. If they migrate elsewhere, not only will that have huge economic implications, but it will have huge implications for associations that are trying to figure out how to have a relationship with stakeholders who now not only have a lot of different sensibilities about them in their just generally in the way they were raised and the way they were educated, but will now have a different sensibility because they will be truly global and may look upon being a part of an American or national association as something that doesn't really fit their global lifestyle.
Yeah.
And that's just one factor. So that's a fairly simple set of sentences that I've given you to explain how I think the interaction among these different forces are likely to play out over the course of the next 10 to 20 years. And again, that's a very, very simple illustration
Yeah.
of something that I think is a lot more complicated than that.
It's actually truly fascinating, and I'm glad that we were able to get into it a little bit. That it's more than just the simplistic things that most people think of. That there is a lot of different forces at play here, and that it is really rapidly changing. Our culture, our world, and that has a direct impact on associations. So, I've just got a couple last questions for you as we wind down, but some really great stuff, Jeff. Thanks. I wanted to talk a little bit about this survey that you've recently closed on how association CEOs are making innovation happen. I understand you'll be releasing the results probably within the next month, but what can you share right now with us?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, the survey, we got over 100 responses from different association CEOs, both in the U.S. and a few outside of the U.S. And I think, what's interesting to me as I've looked at the results, the initial results, and as you say, I'll be sharing some of these results at ASA's annual meeting in Dallas next month during a workshop that I'm doing there on Sunday afternoon, and they'll be shared in other venues as well in the weeks before and after the annual meeting. But I think that the main thing that I'm seeing in the results is I'm seeing CEOs saying that they understand that innovation is necessary. Very much in concert with the anecdote I shared earlier about the CEO or the association in the global association that needed to build a capacity for innovation. I think more association CEOs, at least in response to the survey, are recognizing that competition is a major factor for them. They are recognizing that innovation is going to be essential to their long-term success, that they must build a capacity for this, that they don't really see, for the most part, how they'll succeed without a capacity for innovation, which for me really raises a question of, what do they think innovation is? and that's not something I chose to tackle on this survey because there's no good way to do it in a way that's easily reportable. I'd have to take hundreds of different definitions and try to parse them and try to synthesize them, and I chose not to do that in this case. But I think it raises a question that's interesting for us to talk about is not so much how we define innovation, because I think that's something we've talked to death, but rather when they say innovation is imperative, what do they mean? And that's something that the survey results will show on some level in terms of talking about what are their priorities for the next 12 months. And again, I think that's something that I'll be putting out there in about a month or so to say what are the drivers right now, what's driving your innovation effort right now, what are the obstacles you're facing right now, and then what are going to be your priorities for the next 12 months in terms of building your capacity for innovation. I also think the other thing I've noticed is that in looking at these results is that there is some issue relative to how CEOs see other stakeholders inside their organizations and their level of commitment and capacity for innovation. Do boards actually value this? Are they committed to the work of innovation? Do senior teams value this? Are they committed? Do staffs value this, and members, and so on? And I think there'll be some interesting things that emerge, from that. So yeah, so there'll be more on this, coming out, certainly on my blog. As we get closer to ASA's annual meeting, I'll be sharing some results and some tidbits there, and then I'll be talking more during my workshop on the Sunday of the annual meeting. I forget the date. I think it's the 11th of August.
Right.
Talking about the longer term, some of the bigger findings of the survey, and there'll be other things that people will be able to download as we get later into the summer.
Good. So, in addition to that, you've also got an ebook that's in the works. Wanted to have you talk a little bit about that. It's titled "Associations Unorthodox: 6 Really Radical Shifts Towards the Future." When's it coming out, and what details can you share with us?
Right now, the target date for release is August 1, but it's certainly going to come out before ASA's annual meeting, and I know that now for sure because I've just said it to you, and so it's on video that I've said. It will be out before ASA's annual meeting, and I think that I think the reason why I wanted to write this ebook is I am a little concerned about some of the advice that I think associate leaders are getting right now. And I think it goes back to what I said at the beginning, which is our bringing a 21st century sensibility to the work of trying to figure out where our organizations go from here. And I look at some of the things that are being shared in other venues, other books and blog posts and articles and writings and so on and so forth, and talk conferences and that kind of thing. And again, I don't want to, I'm not trying to be critical. I'm just saying that I'm a little concerned we're not really driving home with our current and next generation leaders the need to make a fundamental shift in their thinking that matches the fundamental shift happening in the world around them. And so this ebook, which is going to be a very, fairly brief and free, which is a great price for everyone, free and very usable resource, is going to talk about what I think are the 6 really fundamental shifts that we have to make in our thinking and our approach to our work over the course of not just the next 10 years, but really over the course of these next few years. That to go back to what we said earlier, if we're going to exploit the opportunities in our window that we have right now that remains open, if we're going to exploit those opportunities, these are the things we really need to do to be able to exploit those opportunities. But it all comes back to, are we willing and able to question the orthodoxy, the orthodox beliefs that our organizations have always operated on? And then are we willing to take action once we've questioned them and said, okay, we've wrestled this down, this orthodoxy that has always been a part of the way we do our work, and now that we know it's no longer operative, we need a new belief, and we need to implement that new belief right away in the way we do things, right? And I think that's a subtle point that I just want to quickly elaborate on, which is our new belief, whatever that might be. Let's say our new belief is that, it's more important for us to, curate the broad range of content that's out there rather than being solely content generators. That's not just an activity we perform, even though it is an activity we perform from a business model perspective. It's a philosophical strategic approach that has to permeate the entire organization, right? So the underlying belief has to get into every phase of what we do as an organization just as surely as the orthodox belief has become a part of everything the organization does, and so I think that's what this in some sense this book is hopefully trying to trigger in our community is trigger saying these are 6 shifts that you have to make, and understand that by making these 6 shifts, it's not just about the shift. It's about the longer term strategic and operational implications of making these shifts and making sure that you're actually living it once you start doing it,
Yeah.
but once it's not an event, it's not a one-off thing, it's something and you keep on doing it and you keep on making sure it becomes deeper into the organization so that you actually are shifting the way you're doing business.
Great. We'll look forward to getting that. So, Jeff, thanks so much. I really appreciate you doing the interview, and thank you everyone for watching. Be sure to sign up in the upper right-hand corner of this website to be updated via email when new interviews are posted. Also, follow @BrianKellyNow on Twitter to stay on top of all things Association Mavens related. Lastly, please submit your recommendation for which Association Maven you'd like to see interviewed next. Thanks again for watching. Bye-bye.